Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiL.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, episode 112, recorded May 20th, 2011, 15th Century Planking. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs by mail in about one business day. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Hey, folks, it's Denise Howell, and you've tuned in for This Week in Law, episode 112. We've got a great panel of folks to talk with you, including Tom Foremski, the Silicon Valley Watcher. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Great to have you on the show finally. I've been pestering Tom for a while to join us, and I'm thrilled that he finally has consented to do so. Tom's blog is one of my favorites, and he's definitely one of the great voices and commentators and observers of Silicon Valley. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Denise.
Also with us on a return visit to TWiL is Justin Gray of Gray on Claims. Hey, Justin.
Hey, Denise. It's great to be back on the show.
Wonderful to have you back. Justin is a patent lawyer and is going to chime in on some patent-related issues as well as everything else we talk about today. Also joining us is our wonderful guest host from last week's show and frequent TWiL guest, Evan Brown. Hi, Evan.
Hey, how's it going, Denise? You know, it's a real bittersweet feeling to be here today. I know it's going to be an awesome show. It's going to, totally rock out. But if you haven't heard, the world is going to end tomorrow at around noon. So I'm sad that this is the last TWiL I guess we'll ever do together. So I hope we're going to have as much fun as what we, expect to.
I know. Let's make it a good one in light of that. I was just hearing that on the radio as I dropped my kid off from school, but what I didn't hear is why the world is ending tomorrow exactly. Can you fill me in?
Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming.
It's
the rapture.
It's finally the rapture.
Yes.
Right
set your alarm clock early. You want to make the most of tomorrow.
Okay. Good. Do we have an hour? An appointed
I think
time?
it's around noon. I don't know if that's Eastern or Central, but it's the clock is ticking.
Noon wherever you are. Presumably the rapture can figure that out and go time zone by time zone, I would think.
Yeah. I guess it may not be all at once. It might be a sweeping kind of thing. Who knows?
All right. I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at anybody's religious beliefs.
I'm terribly offended.
And if it might have sounded that way momentarily, that was not my intent. Okay, so some people are religiously devoted, how about that, hey, to the stock LinkedIn today. Yesterday, we had a phenomenally event-filled, up-the-charts IPO, tech IPO, first one in a long time. And LinkedIn is now a public company. And let's see, what are they trading at right now? Refresh. We've got them trading at $95.38 a share. And I bring it up on our show, This Week in Law, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is the professional social network, right? So for me personally, I have lots of people who are in the legal profession, but maybe not tech aficionados who are constantly asking me about LinkedIn. Do they have to be on LinkedIn? Their clients are asking them to friend them on LinkedIn, and they wonder what that's all about. So I think it's interesting that the professional network is gaining traction and perhaps roping people in, and will do more so, I think, after the IPO. And secondly, I think it's interesting just from the standpoint of the fact that the other social networks struggle with these privacy considerations, how they handle user data, what they're doing with it, whether governments should be concerned about that. But LinkedIn seems to exist in a bubble outside of that because of its professional orientation. So I throw this out here for our discussion. Tom, you wrote about the IPO. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously it seems to provide a green light to a lot of other tech IPOs that are waiting in the wings. We've had 10 years of very few IPOs, And that's a problem for Silicon Valley and innovation, because it's not putting money back into the system. Money has been coming back into the system through acquisitions. Companies have been acquiring some of the more promising startups, but now it seems like there's a new appetite for tech IPOs, and so there's a lot of companies waiting in the wings to follow LinkedIn's example.
Right. Evan, have you jumped out and bought your first shares of stock?
No, I haven't yet. You know, I mean, from what I gather, and I guess, Tom, you know about this, you know, better than anyone. And, you know, what I've read is mostly institutional investors at this point. I don't know. Did you buy any, Denise? Have you got any?
No, I have not. You know, I just got back from my trip where I was gone last week. And yeah, this is something we should throw in for discussion too, especially I'd like to hear from Tom on it too. Because I'm sort of reluctant these days to buy tech stocks because I do this show every week, and it's something that, you know, I'm sort of on the fence about. I don't really consider myself a journalist, but in some senses, I guess I am a commentator and come on and do this stuff. So I do own some tech stocks, and I have disclosed those in various places from time to time in my career as a blogger and a host here. And, you know, my I guess bottom line take on it is that I own so little that it's, you know, it really wouldn't make a huge difference. And, you know, I'm not going to go out and plug Google or Apple or whatever else I might own a few shares of simply because I own those shares. It's not, you know, there's no real one-to-one correlation on that. But yet at the same time, you know, you don't want to do things that make you look slimy, as we all know. Tom,
you know,
Tom, how do you come down on that?
Well, I agree with you. I don't invest in companies in sectors which I cover as a reporter, and that's from my upbringing, you know, working for the Financial Times and so on. And it's a code of ethics that all media organizations follow. Except recently, TechCrunch editor Mike Arrington said he's going to start investing, or has begun investing in startups, and he says that's not going to be he says it will be a conflict of interest, but his reporting won't change, and I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think Silicon Valley and its thousands of startups need a level playing field. They shouldn't have to worry about if a reporter has a financial interest in a competitor, for example. It should be a level playing field, because innovation is important to this country, to the economy, and we need a media coverage that's not conflicted in any way. You know, Mike Arrington will say, well, personal connections at companies are more of a problem than financial, and that's not true. You know, I might have a friend at a startup, and I might write a story occasionally or something because of that, but it's nothing like a financial interest. If I had money invested in that startup, that's a whole different ball of wax, really.
Right. Justin, what do you think about the nature of LinkedIn and how well it did in its IPO? I was, you know, this is sort of the business niche social network. It's not Facebook, but yes, yet it certainly has generated a lot of excitement. Do you think that its business orientation is sufficient to really move it forward as a big public company, or maybe perhaps that's helpful because it helps it avoid some of these other issues that around privacy and information leaks? What do you think?
Well, first off, I was definitely surprised with how high the stock went, and I'm not, you know, I'm not very much involved in the stock market by any means. Also, because I do a lot of work in the tech sector. But you know, one thing that strikes me, at least with my own personal use of LinkedIn, I am on LinkedIn. I have some, you know, dozens of contacts, and you know, log in on a fairly regular basis, but the vast majority of the people that at least I'm connected to seem to use LinkedIn in a very passive manner. They almost seem, you know, not to know really what to do with it. They kind of know we should be on LinkedIn and we should be connected with all the people that we know. But once we get there, what further can we do? So I'm a little skeptical overall of LinkedIn, just because, with my own personal experience, I don't see it as much as the same vein as Facebook, where you have a lot more people who are much more active in the community, in the social community, whereas LinkedIn, at least with my personal experience, is much more passive use.
Right. I think for lawyers, it's it's supplanted this thing that for decades, if not centuries, was the directory called Martindale Hubble, where, if you had somebody that you wanted to contact and find out about them and their reputation, you would go to that huge, gigantic books that used to reside in the law library. And still do, I'm sure, but they have their own online presence. But I think that they have been, completely supplanted by the likes of LinkedIn, which have given the opportunity for professionals to network with their peers and also their clients. Do you agree, Evan?
I do. There's no doubt it's really in a sweet spot when it comes to online social networking. If we think about how it arose historically, it arose, out of this context that was characterized by sites like Friendster and MySpace. Is when LinkedIn started to come into public consciousness, or professional public consciousness here. And so it has always been differentiated from sites like Facebook and from MySpace and Friendster, in as much as it purports to be, and indeed is, professional. So for that reason, folks who aren't necessarily early adopters when it comes to stuff on the internet and web platforms, they feel safe joining in there. It's like any place where a professional can go and it's okay to wear a tie. They'll think, oh, well, this is okay. At least I'm not going to stumble and fall and do something that I shouldn't be doing. I'm not going to embarrass myself. I'm not going to be falling into some pitfall. The word pitfall is something that professionals love talking about, lawyers especially. All the pitfalls of social networking. There are very few pitfalls at LinkedIn. So because of that sweet spot that it's in, it has this ability to draw in somewhat of a mainstream adopter kind of crowd, and that arises just as much from the fact that it's boring there. You don't go to hang out on LinkedIn. You go to Facebook to look at pictures and make jokes and share videos and stuff. You go to LinkedIn, I don't know, after you meet somebody at a conference and you want to learn a little bit more about them or whatever, just kind of, if you need somebody's email address or whatever.
It's not true for everybody.
Okay, well, I'd love to hear about some fun experience.
I'm the same with you. I don't spend that much time on LinkedIn, but increasingly I am meeting people who are saying I'm spending more time on LinkedIn now than I have done on Facebook, and I used to be on Facebook all the time. They'll tell me. So it's interesting how Facebook is now becoming more about family and friends, when before it was about business contacts as well as family and friends, and much of the business part of Facebook, or what it was for people, is now moving to LinkedIn. And I know people that spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. They're not sharing photos of their vacation or anything, but they are sharing articles related to their profession, for example. And so it's kind of surprising how much more momentum LinkedIn has gotten over the past year, and become more important for people in terms of networking and so on.
Right. So Tom, you raise a good point, because I think that in addition to sort of supplanting whatever professional directories used to exist out there, or are still clinging to life out there, it sort of, in my experience and use, has supplanted all the listservs I used to belong to. So if you're a part of some professional group where the people would communicate with one another traditionally via email, LinkedIn seems to have gobbled up that niche as well by having, whatever you want to call it, their groups, discussions there in the context of their site, and you can get those summarized and sent to you in an email, but the discussions there seem to be, I agree with you, Evan, that they're not exactly the liveliest discussions.
Mm-hmm. Well,
We should probably put you in touch with LinkedIn's marketing people, because they need to use that tagline, join LinkedIn, it's boring.
Right. Either that or they'll want to give me some rehabilitation. I don't know. I mean, there's no doubt that it serves its purpose, and it's for stuff that is in the work-a-day world. You go there to engage in these discussions and have professional networking, and that is, terribly important. And obviously, it's of a very substantial value. Leaving, aside the question for a moment of whether this is, grossly overvalued at this point, it's no mistake. It's certainly no surprise that it is the first one for which we're seeing an IPO here, because the professional context is where a lot of dollars are, and by necessity, the issues and the level of risk in the investment and the overall perception of it is going to be different, and that's neither good nor bad. That's just the way it is due to the nature of the platform.
Right. Beatmaster just cuts to the chase in the IRC and says, but the question remains, can you play Angry Birds on LinkedIn? And I think the answer to that, well, can you play Angry Birds on Facebook? I've never actually done that. It's usually more of a mobile device thing for me.
I'm way too busy on my farm to notice, so I don't know.
Exactly, you're too busy.
I mean, there is some little interesting anecdotal things that happens on this. One of the I guess I do spend quote unquote more time on LinkedIn than I think, because I have it set up so that my Twitter feed automatically goes through LinkedIn. So it's not uncommon for people, especially here at the office, to say, "Oh yeah, I saw your LinkedIn update about this," and it kind of takes me, the time is getting shorter that it takes me to realize what they're talking about now. Right. And it's just so funny. I forget about that context, because something I'll tweet, is for, I have my Twitter followers in mind when I think of that, and it's somewhat overlapping, but it's not a completely overlapping subset of people who I'm connected with on LinkedIn and who follow me on Twitter. So sometimes the context can be completely lost, and I think to myself, my gosh, I am being completely too irreverent for the LinkedIn crowd. I need to maybe unlink those accounts. Who knows?
I think that's a good point. You do. Everything used to be, my Twitter feed, my blog posts, they get published on LinkedIn as well. But and sometimes I'll publish stuff on Facebook, but you can't just dump everything into LinkedIn, for example, or dump everything into Facebook, or dump everything into Twitter. You do have to be conscious of different groups of readers, even the time of the day and night, and so on.
For sure.
So it does make life a little bit more complicated, but I think it also helps to focus a lot of this stuff and bring down the noise level. Because the noise level online can be horrendous with people's like buttons and the sharing. So,
definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, if LinkedIn succeeds by being boring and recycling Twitter, Facebook, which can also recycle Twitter quite effectively, is much less boring and tends to get it things like hearings before the Senate Commerce Subcommittee on Consumer Protection. That happened earlier this week. There was a hearing on mobile privacy that involved the big three, Facebook, Apple, and Google. And some questions for them, primarily on location services, which they continue to say, if you read the testimony, we're actually not, everything from we're actually not collecting any location data at all, and then you read the asterisk, unless the users specifically consent. And then also users can opt out easily. And, so they're trying to placate the folks in Washington on that front. But another little interesting tidbit that came out in the hearing, and it was the Commerce Committee Chair Jay Rockefeller who was really pounding the podium about this one, is it turns out that Facebook has, now let me get my numbers straight, I think it was over 5 million users who are minors. Then this is a report, under not just minors, but under 13, under the policy age of how old you must be to use Facebook. And this was done by a survey and report from Consumer Reports. And I personally am not surprised about that at all, because I have so many friends who are parents of older children, in their tween years, who have made the decision that their children are actually sophisticated enough and net savvy enough and mature enough to use Facebook, despite what Facebook's terms and conditions say. And they're on there. Let's see, 7.5 million underage children, according to Consumer Reports, are using Facebook in violation of their terms of service. So any thoughts about this one, Evan? Can you see your kids jumping on Facebook anytime soon? And let me ask the follow-up question. Is this really Facebook's responsibility?
Yeah, I certainly like that second question even better there. There's my oldest one is 5. We discussed this before, and I certainly, it would come as no surprise to anyone to hear that it's a high priority for me to inculcate proper values in my children as to the responsible use and assimilation of technology into their lives. It's one of the most important things that I think that a father in the early 21st century, or a parent for that matter, has the responsibility toward his or her children to do that. So with that, I feel that when it's a close call, whether to introduce the technology and let it become part of the kid's life, or to insulate them and shield it from them and not let it be a part of their life, when that's a close call of whether to do that, I would tend to err, or at least go on the side of introducing the technology, because in most circumstances, obviously, an informed person can make a better decision as to what is the responsible use and what's the right thing to do. So, I let my kids play. Of course, I say this all the time. Angry Birds is huge. Of course, they play games. Getting the iPad was as big a deal for my 5-year-old as it was for me. But as far as going on a social network, that's hugely, that's a huge drastic step to take. Opening up the world like that. There clearly are risks. So one has to be responsible. So I would be upset 5 years from now if my 10-year-old son, he'll be 10 at that point, was on Facebook and I didn't know about it, and I didn't have the opportunity to closely supervise what he was doing on there and all of that. So it definitely is a problem. The segue then is whose problem is it? And clearly Facebook should not be the one that is entirely responsible for this, because they can't be. And I think Rockefeller, West Virginia, the congressman from West Virginia, really, it sounds like he was lambasting Facebook a little bit too much here, kind of making it personal to Mark Zuckerberg, saying, one of the reasons that Facebook has this problem is because its founder is only 27 years old and he doesn't have, the right social responsibility and all this stuff. That is clearly taking it too far in assigning responsibility like this. It's got to be, as with all things, it's got to be a moderate kind of approach here, a collaborative kind of approach, an informed approach, bringing up that motif quickly again. There's got to be a combination of responsibility at the individual level, but not only that, there has to be a means by which the platform allows those responsible sensibilities and those norms to become actual and not just potentialities or hopes or wishes. There's got to be ways that, the reasonably, that a person with reasonable, ordinary technological acumen as a parent can do to implement things that will protect children, not only to protect them, but to also bring them in to the next generation, to maturity in the next generation with the ever increasing sophistication of all of this technology. It's an incredibly complicated issue.
Yes, it is. And I can see why the committee would want to chat about it with Facebook and others who collect information from those under 13 in violation of federal law, because that's actually what it is when they do that. Justin, do you think that if parents are intervening and making this judgment call and consciously violating Facebook's terms of service by allowing their children to go on the site under the age of 13. Twofold question for you. Do you think that that's something that Facebook should be responsible for policing more actively? And do you think it's something that parents should ultimately be responsible for on a legal, on the legal side?
It's, I first will say I agree with pretty much everything that Evan said. I think he, summed it up very, very well, that there is, a lot of it, I think, comes down to the parents and making sure that your children's use of technology is appropriate and is safe. I'll also note that I think within the last week, I actually got a new friend on Facebook that is about 6 months old. Friends of mine recently had their first child, and have just set the child up with a Facebook account, and they're just posting pictures, cute pictures of the baby and outfits and whatnot. So I also question a little bit, whenever I see these kind of blanket statements and large numbers and things, I question where is the number really coming from. So at least some of these, the number is 7.5 million who are presumably under the age of 13. Just from my personal experience, I wonder what percentage of those are things like my friends who are, putting their baby on Facebook right away. But overall, I think in my previous life, I was a computer programmer, but not anymore. I would find it, Facebook can do what it can just to try to weed out those, if that's going to be their policy, that you have to be over, age 13. They can only do what they can. And, the internet is the internet. And there are obviously various ways to get onto websites if, you're not technically the age limit, but you present yourself as that age. So I think, it's a combination of what Facebook can realistically do, but I think even more so, parents making sure that they're appropriately monitoring their children's use of technological tools like this.
Yeah, and there's software out now which comes from like the antivirus security sector, which will look at look at people's Facebook accounts, including kids and adults, to see if there's any malware, if there's any links they shouldn't be clicking on. Also, it will alert parents if their children are engaging with inappropriate people, because this one company has these algorithms that can tell the age of somebody, because on Facebook you really don't know if the person is who they are, which, by the way, is something that LinkedIn doesn't have a problem with, because you are who you are. But on Facebook you can be anybody, and you hear stories about predators engaging with young children. Well, this software will look at things like that, and will send parents alerts warning them that maybe their child is engaging with people who are inappropriate for their age group and so on. So there are tools coming out which will help parents and families kind of avoid some of the online pitfalls that these communities present.
Right. That's a really interesting observation, Tom, against the backdrop of Facebook, Google, and Apple being sort of called into the principal's office in the form of this hearing. Senator Rockefeller, the chairman, said consumers want to understand and have control of their personal information. Unfortunately, today, this expectation is not being met. The companies here today are leaders in the industry, so today I ask them to lead. So I guess the logical conclusion from that statement is, I think, that the chairman would like to see them taking more proactive measures, such as you mentioned, on their own, rather than leaving it to the third-party app marketplace to take care of that. I think it's also really interesting that you observed, you are who you are on LinkedIn, but not necessarily on Facebook. You're supposed to be on Facebook under their terms of service. You are not allowed to impersonate someone or say that you are someone you're not. I suppose you could say that you are, a walrus or something, and there's nobody going to come after you. But say that you're a walrus.
The walrus is
I am
Paul.
the walrus.
I am the walrus. But people have gotten into trouble over saying they're someone they're not. It's really more of a community standards thing that keeps you who you are on LinkedIn. I'd argue more than what the respective terms of service specify, because you're supposed to do the same thing on both, but in practice, people don't. Okay. Any final thoughts on this before we move on to some other considerations, Tom?
No, but I think this is a topic that's not going to go away because the nature of the medium keeps changing. So there's going to be new kinds of exploits and so on, which you can't really predict at the moment. So it is good that Facebook and Google should be proactive. However, they don't want to do too much like that, because if they become responsible for the content on their sites, then that puts them in a different legal category. For example, newspapers, they have a legal responsibility that a company like Google or Facebook doesn't have, because they just want to see themselves as offering a platform for other people. Now, if they have to start policing that platform, it's going to get very expensive very quickly, and the valuation is going to drop, and so on. So it's in their interest to try and keep away from doing too much policing and just saying, look, we're just a platform. Just like the internet is a platform, you get all sorts of stuff happening. It's got nothing to do with us. The problem is somewhere else. Now, that they can't get away with that forever. For example, in Italy, Google ran into a problem last year because of a video somebody had uploaded showing a child being bullied at school, an autistic child. And Google eventually pulled the video, but it took a long time for that to happen. And the Italian courts held them responsible. So if we get more cases like that, it's really going to change the way people view Google, for example, in this case, and YouTube, from a platform to more like a newspaper where you have responsibilities towards the community that go beyond being just a platform.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that that's a really good segue to what I want to talk about next, which is your post, Tom, on body video cameras and your observation. This is the San Francisco Police Department beginning to, their police chief, Greg Suhr, looking to equip officers with cameras to capture arrests. We've talked a lot about this topic on the show, not so much about the filming from the officer's side, but from the arrestees' side or the bystanders' side, people filming police doing their jobs. And we'll have a good example of that in a second here too. But here, the police are equipping officers, hopefully, with body cameras to capture arrests. In my local police department here in Newport Beach, California, I've definitely seen officers with helmet cameras on before doing DUIs to make sure that, if there's any discussion about the propriety of the arrest, or I'm sure they do it in other contexts. I just happened to be there and witness one of my friends undergoing that process, the DUI process.
Oh, that sucks.
So, I'm sure these are out there. But your observation, Tom, that there will be many social repercussions. You'll never know when you're on camera. You will be guarded in everything you say and do. I think that resonates with what we've been talking about whose responsibility it is to police these behavioral issues on social networks. You want to elaborate on that thought for us?
Yeah, we just started writing about this last year. Just thinking about the number of computers that's out there. Our phones are computers. We've got laptops, we've got desktops, and they're just everywhere. But every computer also has a camera in it pretty much now. So you've got this ubiquity of computing devices, but also you've got this ubiquity of video devices, recording devices, and you know, you can fit a camera into the smallest of packages these days, and stick a wireless chip in it, and you're streaming video wherever you go. We saw that with Justin TV, for example, a couple of years ago, where people were putting their whole lives online. And you know, these tiny little cameras, we're just going to get more and more of them. And I just see the future. You're not going to even know if there's a camera in the room with you. You might be recorded as you speak. There might be all sorts of recording devices going on. How are we going to create new rules in our society? Is it going to have to be? Will there be new laws? For example, recording telephone conversations, you have to disclose that the conversation has been recorded. Will we have that in our personal lives? You know, people will argue, well, my recording device is always on for safety reasons, you know, in case I'm attacked or mugged. You know, there's video of it. And so right now we have an expectation of that our conversations aren't being broadcast on the internet or anywhere. But in the future, I don't think we can say that that's going to be true, because we don't know if our friends, our colleagues are recording stuff. So we're going to assume that it is being recorded, and that's obviously going to affect the way we behave. We're going to be less candid, possibly. We're going to be more guarded in what we say. And you know, in some cases, that's probably for good reason. It's probably good to do that. But are we going to lose a lot of the spontaneity we have in interactions? I think you know, living an always-on world is one thing, but always on camera, always on a recording, that's a completely different world. And you know, we have a public life, but we also have an expectation of a private life. Are we still going to be able to have that private life? Some people say, well, there's no privacy anymore. Everything, you know, everything is online, or everything should be online. I don't believe in that kind of extreme, but we are going to be facing some interesting societal questions around this technology.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Crucial Wax in IRC says a phone call enters your private space, your home, for example. Seems like it's different when you're out in public, but that begs the question, you know, when are you out in public? When someone's checking in at your house on Foursquare and you know, they've got their body camera on as they come in for your intimate family dinner. It's kind of a different situation. Evan, any thoughts here?
I like thinking about this in terms of the Orwellian paradigm and pondering how the principle that underlies the kind of panoptic view of the government that the government had in the book 1984 is somehow manifesting itself, but it's doing it in a way that when most of us read George Orwell for the first time didn't expect that it actually would happen. And what I mean is this: there's this specter or this concern that we are always under surveillance and that we're always being watched. But it's not in the form of the telescreen that Orwell described, you know, which I envision as like a flat panel television that everybody has in the room, and you know that Big Brother, i.e. the government, is watching you through the telescreen. No, it's much more radically distributed, you know, in that the eyes, if you will, of the eyes that Big Brother has aren't the telescreen, but they're these cameras that Tom is talking about on all these ubiquitous devices, or these devices that have become ubiquitous out there in the field of time and space. What's more, it's not the government that's doing the surveillance. It's not Big Brother, although Big Brother, the government could have a way into all of these things. It's more so the sum total of everybody else watching each other. And for some reason, I don't think we are as quick to find that objectionable because we keep buying these mobile devices and these computers that have webcams, and we appreciate this and we enjoy it, and the nobody is making a big deal, a huge deal at least, about the cops adopting this technology. Clearly, articles are being written about it, and we're talking about it here, so it does have its problematic aspects. But we're not in an uproar like we would be if the government mandated that there's a telescreen in everyone's house now. So it's interesting to see how there is a certain principle of, and I use the term, panoptic. I'm thinking of the Jeremy Bentham, the philosopher who described the panopticon, the prison, where, the guard can be in the middle and see everyone. The cells are arranged in a big circle around that. There's this panopticism, this panoptical view of things that is actually very nuanced and very interstitial between our lives every day. And it's difficult to regulate because it bumps up into contradictory norms. Our desire to want to have the convenience and the security of these devices, but then the corresponding risk of the loss of privacy. So for that reason, it's terribly difficult to regulate.
In the UK, the United Kingdom has more public cameras than any other country. I saw some numbers on it. There are millions everywhere, and to try and cut down on street crime and so on. So in the UK, they've been dealing with this issue and discussing this kind of society, if you will, for some time. I'm not sure if they've come to any radical conclusions about it, But yeah, in the personal space, we haven't had that explosion of cameras yet, but it's coming. It's around the corner.
Right. I think that Burke has something we can look at on this front, flipped a bit around. There was a 17-year-old journalist working for MinnesotaChange.org. Here he is. He was doing a story on unwarranted raids. He told the officer that. The officer promptly came over and arrested him. And he was taken back to the police station. He was questioned. He was a well-educated 17-year-old. He was asked why he was filming the officer, and he told them the officer was in a public place, and I have a First Amendment right, and there's no privacy interest in what he was doing. He was told by the officer who arrested him and brought him in that he was interfering with a police investigation. So I guess we get into some tensions there about when one may do that or not. But really, he didn't seem to be interfering very much. He just happened to be standing there with a camera, caught the officer's attention, and then when he told him what he was doing, got himself arrested. But he, and if you'd like to watch that whole video, we've got it in our discussion points. This time at Internet Cases, delicious.com/Internet Cases/112. That's where our discussion points are for the show today. So I think this is an interesting example of, keeping people accountable on all fronts. Oh, the footnote to the story is that the officer who arrested him got himself suspended as a result of doing this. So I think it's a big gray area. We've had lots and lots of stories where recording via audio or video, the police has been challenged by the police and counter-challenged by people like the ACLU. So we're going to see that, I think, continue to unfold. Justin, any thoughts about, I think the 17-year-old's name, if I'm not mistaken, from the video is Robert Wanick. Any thoughts about his experience here?
I think the only thing I have to add is that there's definitely, we have to keep in mind that there is going to be a balance, regarding what your expectations are when you're both in public and in private. And given where technology is going, we don't exactly know what that balance is going to be yet. Further, I'm still a strong believer in that most people, not all people, but most people have a fair degree of common sense. And hopefully, once all of this, once we see where things are going, common sense will hopefully rule the day, and we will find out where the appropriate balance is. There will always be, regardless of the particular technology at issue, or basically any issue, there will always be situations like the video that we just saw, where something is, either taken completely out of proportion, or just there was a potential lack of common sense. But just because that we're seeing maybe more and more of these types of situations come up lately, doesn't mean that the appropriate balance, once all is said and done, will eventually be set in some way that actually appeals to common sense.
Right. Web 4089 in IRC is saying, if every cop can video you, why can't you do the same? And we certainly are getting to a society where I think that expectation will be the norm, that in public, that there are likely to have to be a number of video cameras on you from various sources at all times. JD and Kenyon in IRC says you just have to wear a Halloween mask in the UK with all their cameras all the time, always a different one. So there's a remedy from IRC.
We've really got to be careful with these discussions, and it's so easy for us to let our thoughts swing to one side, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, thinking these pigs, that cop was such a goon, why was he doing that? Why is he being Barney Fife? And he obviously tramples on the Constitution and has no sensibilities whatsoever. We've really got to be careful in letting our minds shift so far to the other direction, because, we are a nation that is governed by the rule of law. And unfortunately, the responsibility, here I am getting all on a soapbox, high and mighty, whatever. I'm just talking. Unfortunately, the responsibility of enforcing that rule of law rests on the shoulders of people who are imperfect. So there's a couple of ways of looking at this. That cop in North Dakota, he may very well have been a complete idiot and did something idiotic and deserves to be suspended and, should be thrown off the force and his name stricken from the book of life and all of that stuff. Or it could be that, we're just seeing a little snippet of the film here. Maybe this kid had been harassing him all afternoon, and this was finally just the last straw, and he really was, impeding an investigation or something like that. We've got to be so careful to not let our sensibilities get riled in a way that leads us to draw such radical conclusions about things that we are doing a disservice to the real and critically important enterprise of law enforcement. So we just got to be measured and circumspect when we're thinking about these issues, because it's getting to be so much more of a nuanced picture all the time, how to actually do this, to balance these rights. There are so many more opportunities for rights to be trampled upon, or at least to be abridged because of the technology that we have. Just got to be so measured with this. That's all. I'm counseling against moderation. I think that's not the first time I've done that. Or I'm counseling for moderation. It's not the first time I've done that.
And sometimes you counsel against it too, so you've got all your bases covered.
Right. That's good. We can speak with forked tongue.
Well, here's an area where both moderation and video, I think, come into play and give us another just shade to the discussion of how life proceeds in an era where online video is so prevalent, and how that can have ramifications, very serious ramifications for people. This whole phenomenon of planking, and that there was a boy, a young man in Australia, Acton Beale. First of all, if you're not familiar with planking, I do think that we may have a video on that too. Sorry, Burke, for not more of a heads up on that, but if you have that anywhere handy, you can play it while I'm talking here. Planking, apparently, it's not something I'd heard of. Evan, you put this one in the discussion points. Oh, here, I'll put the video.
I just put the link into IRC to the video on planking.
Great. All right, so Burke, that's coming your way. So people are going around, and because they can take photos and or videos of themselves doing this, they are laying on top of things like signposts and scaffolding. And the idea is simply to lay, I'm not sure if there is a convention that one lays on their tummy only or also on their back, but you lay with your hands stiff at your sides as though you are a plank. And there we go. There's some video of some people planking around. And
I think you have to be prone and not supine.
all right, there we go.
That's what the article said, or at least it said prone.
Right. Yes, they all do seem to be head down. Oh, except for that one, the plank sandwich. I do like that. Oh, the planking down the stairs. So, you know, but for online video, there is no planking, right? Or one could argue photos. The whole purpose of doing this is to share the activity in a community sort of crowdsourced way and chuckle at what your fellow plankers have been up to, or chuckle at what plankers in general have been up to if you would never do such a thing. But the danger is that it encourages people to both break laws. I'm fairly confident that planking would be against some sort of public safety law in whatever venue it's happening in, and it encourages them to take, you know, extreme risks. And this guy in Australia, I suppose it was inevitable that someone was going to have a problem with it. He died trying to plank on, I believe it was some sort of balcony on a multi-story building. So, Evan, what do you think? You know, to add this to our role of video in society discussion, and what do you think?
I bring this in, and I think of this in terms of that ever-present distinction that we need to make sometimes between legal regulations and normative regulations. Yes, there are laws that are broken, and there are causes of action that arise when this is done in some circumstances, like if you're going to trespass onto someone else's property so that you can have a photo taken of yourself planking thereupon. You know, there's that's unlawful, and that would have been unlawful in the 15th century, just like it is now. I guess you would have had a hard time having the photo taken of yourself in the 15th century, but that's neither here nor there.
Yes, and your YouTube count would have been low. Right.
I guess you would have somebody do a woodcut engraving of you there in the 15th century. So, you know, there are these, you know, these things that are unlawful about it, but what we have here is a layer of complexity added onto it with the technology and the way that community can arise around these activities, and you know, enthusiasm, and it becomes a popular thing to do. And we've seen this before in YouTube, you know, people acting dumb. The examples like that are a dime a dozen. You know, this trend of people, you know, throwing the drinks on the people as you go through the drive-thru at McDonald's. You know, you throw the drink back at the person working at McDonald's. You film that on YouTube, and everybody gets a giggle out of that. So, you know, it's not a new phenomenon, but what we see here, it's all fun and games until somebody falls 7 stories to their death. It's interesting, and I think the challenge for us is to place this in the appropriate normative framework rather than trying to enact laws to counteract this or to deal with this, because the laws that are there are perfectly appropriate. The laws of trespass, the laws of, you know, violating public safety, whatever those may be from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It's all something that is outside of the law, but something that does indeed lend itself to regulation in that way. And that is pleasing to me at a cognitive level to think about it in those terms.
Right. Tom, I think that this is interesting against the backdrop of your conclusion on the cops wearing cameras story. You never know when you're going to be on camera. You'll be guarded in everything you do. This sort of flips that on its head, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, some of these things can be a fun activity for people. Obviously, you need to use some common sense. Like, don't do it when you're drunk. But yeah, there's now we have so many media technologies around us and media tools. So, and that's what the Facebook phenomenon is all about too. It's about publishing and sharing and so on. So, and we're going to get more and more of these kind of weird things happening, like planking. But they run their course, and something else pops up, and hopefully something that's not going to be as potentially life-threatening.
Right. Hey, Justin, I promised that we'd get into some patent stuff today. Maybe someone's going to file a patent on that sandwich plank we saw in the video. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for that, While we're waiting for that, tell us what's going on. You had an interesting post on false marking and how those suits are decreasing. You've walked us through that before on earlier episodes of the show. Explain for us one more time about false marking and what it means that some of these cases seem to be going away.
Sure, I'll try to give the 2-minute overview of false marking and then kind of talk about where we've been and where we're going. So false marking, there's a statute, it's 35 U.S.C. 292, that talks about marking patent numbers on products and product literature. I mean, there are countless products. I was actually, before the show, trying to find one that was in my office, but I actually couldn't, which maybe doesn't make my point. But there are tons of products out there where you might see a patent number on the product. That is, there are various incentives for patent holders to mark products with patents. But on the flip side, we do not necessarily want any patent, even if it shouldn't be marked on a product, to be sitting on that product. So 35 U.S.C. 292 allows for fines if you falsely mark a product with intent to deceive the public. And the fine is up to $500 per offense. Now, the reason why this is a big issue now and has been from 2010 onward is that very late in 2010, there was this question of what does per offense mean? And the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit said in very late 2010 that each offense is per article. So essentially per article marked with the patent. Given that particular holding, not surprisingly, in 2010, we saw a false marking frenzy. Literally close to 1,000 lawsuits have been filed between about January 1st of 2010 and today, all alleging false marking. Most of the cases are also involving specifically expired patent numbers.
So let me just jump in here and set the stage for this. If you are an opportunistic plaintiff, you might be out there looking for expired patent numbers, manufacturing mistakes, and when you found a lot of them on a product, you rush in and file a claim. Is that essentially it?
Yeah, that's essentially it. And what we ended up seeing is a lot of the plaintiffs who were involved in these suits and filed these lawsuits in 2010 appeared to be entities normally just created as an LLC that were specifically created to file these false marking lawsuits. And it was basically as easy as trying to go to your local, Walmart or convenience store or whatever, and try to find products that had expired patent numbers on them. Once you find the product, then you sue the associated company. So in 2010, like I said, there were just a ton of these lawsuits. It was a flood of lawsuits being filed. What we've seen very recently is that trend may be slowing down quite a bit. The issue that has come up is that the Federal Circuit, the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, who deals with all patent cases, has clarified what the initial pleading standard for a complaint, the initial document you file in court, is with respect to these false marking claims. There was an issue of whether it was a relaxed pleading standard, which is Rule 8A, or whether it's a heightened pleading standard, which is Rule 9B. District courts had gone either way on this issue. The Federal Circuit in middle of March clarified that for false marking claims, the appropriate standard is 9B, not 8A. So it makes it much more difficult to have a complaint that actually stands up because you have to allege certain things that for various reasons usually aren't present in most of these cases. So if you look at, and I have on my website, Gray on Claims, I have a specific section on false marking cases where I've tabulated with the help of others every false marking case that's been filed in the last 18 months or so. Since March 15th or so, we've seen a huge drop off in the number of cases being filed. We've also seen a very good number of cases, very large number of cases that are being now dismissed by district courts. So, you know, the frenzy may be, you know, it's not over yet. There are still cases being filed. There are still a lot of cases that are pending in the courts. Further, actually, a lot of cases have settled, not surprisingly, and that's actually another interesting nugget with these types of cases, because the fines, the statute says that half of the fine goes to the plaintiff who filed the lawsuit. The other half goes to the United States government. Because that half goes to the United States government, it is subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. And various folks, including myself, have made Freedom of Information Act requests to the government to get access to this data. And also on my website, I have another chart that shows information on pretty much every single case that has been settled since about May of last year. So, you know, these cases, about 270 of them or so have settled thus far. Many more are being dismissed. There are some that are going forward, but the wave that we've seen in 2010, I think, is at the very least going down as opposed to continuing to go up.
Right. Matt McCarry's in IRC, and he's chimed in and said the key to false marking cases should be on intent, much like inequitable conduct and fraud allegations. Is that pretty much how this is shaking out?
Yes, when the cases actually go past the initial pleading stage, and obviously many of them are just being taken care of there, since most of the cases deal with expired patents, and the Federal Circuit has said that an expired patent put on a product is in fact a false marking, that prong of the false marking statute has already basically been taken care of. So the vast majority of the analysis goes into intent to deceive the public. So there's, you know, that's really where, for these cases that go past the pleading stage, that's really where the fight is going to be.
Right. Hey, you know what? I have another patent issue I want to discuss with you. There's yet another patent reform bill pending, and I want to get your 2 cents on that. Some people seem to think it's going to, you know, bring down the entire United States. But before we get to that, I do want to thank our sponsor for episode 112 of This Week in Law, and that is Netflix. Of course, this show is brought to you by Netflix. It delivers movies directly to your home, and that saves you time, money, and hassle. Hey, just to work in, you know, something that I think we might not have gotten to in the context of this ad, in the discussion points, did you see that Netflix bandwidth has actually exceeded BitTorrents? I did put that in the discussion points for the panel. And let's see, it's got 22.2% of the bandwidth, total nationwide bandwidth in the U.S., as opposed to 21.6% by BitTorrent these days. So that means that the Netflix model is actually working, and you know, we could have all sorts of interesting discussion around that too. Yes, thoughts?
I just wanted to mention that Netflix is actually facing a problem now, because a lot of cable companies and telcos have instituted bandwidth caps. So Netflix recently sent a letter to the FCC chairman saying that these bandwidth caps have a potential for stifling innovation. And obviously Netflix is the one that's has the most at stake here at the moment, but also there's thousands of Silicon Valley startups whose models are based on, you know, homes having high-speed connections and sharing all types of media types and so on. If there's a bandwidth cap, those homes are going to be careful about what they view, what they do, and so Netflix is fighting a battle that will benefit, if it succeeds to get rid of these caps, will benefit a lot of innovative companies. So some of these bandwidth caps, they're going to be charging as much as some of them charge as much as $1 per gigabyte of extra bandwidth. Now, gigabyte isn't that much these days. Netflix says that in its letter to the FCC that the actual incremental cost of that gigabyte is more like a penny per gigabyte. So these companies are going to be making a lot of money. And also, it's not much of an incentive to actually upgrade the US infrastructure, which already falls way behind a lot of developing countries. You know, what's the incentive to upgrade the internet infrastructure if you can charge people as much as $1 gigabyte for something that's costing you a penny to carry? So there's quite a big issue here that Netflix is trying to deal with.
Right, and it's fighting the good fight there, as you say, for other companies that will follow in its wake. And your number in your post there, Tom, if folks want to read more about that, you actually had that it was accounting for 30% of internet traffic.
Yeah, during the evenings. Yeah, it's during the evening
during
time.
Evening hours. Yeah, okay, so the other one must be on average. So, you know, folks, it's time to go out and just keep that traffic spiking up because Netflix, of course, has instant video available where you can watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed directly to your PC or Mac, or streamed to your TV via a Netflix-ready device, including Xbox 360, PS3, Nintendo Wii, Roku, or any number of other products who are riding on the back of Netflix's success here. Plus, you can get DVDs by mail in about 1 business day. You can watch as many of those movies as you want, anytime you want. There are never any late fees or due dates. And we have a pick of the week for you. This is what my son watched on the way back from our vacation last week. In the Netflix Instant Queue, there is The Karate Kid, the second version, with Jaden Smith, which I liked quite a bit. I, too, watched the movie. I was a little bit disappointed that they felt the need to ratchet up the kid viciousness in the reimagined version of Karate Kid. It was vicious enough in the first one, I thought. And
yeah, Ralph Macchio, he's to not be messed with.
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
First, you know, when you think vicious, I think Ralph Macchio. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, it's the bullies, really, I was thinking of, that really, you know, they really pummel poor little Jaden Smith in this film. And he has every reason to dislike and come after them and prevail in the end, as, of course, he does. No spoilers here. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the story. But it's a great movie, and it's a good example of how there's really recent content in the Netflix Instant library too. That one came out, you know, I think just a few months ago on DVD. Anyway, so that is our streaming pick of the week. You can instantly watch this movie or choose from thousands of TV episodes and other movies when you register for a free trial membership at netflix.com/twit. And we thank Netflix for their support of This Week in Law. All right, Justin, so we've got yet another patent reform bill. It seems like one comes along every 6 months or so. And this one, I've read very mixed things about. I don't know if that always happens. But a couple of stories in particular have stated that things won't, you know, can't be patented in the U.S. anymore if this passes. Basically, you know, getting a little bit extreme in their rhetoric there, and that our whole national security is bound to suffer because of the inability to patent necessary security technologies. What's your take, Justin?
Well, at least in the show notes, there was an article that I read this morning from the Mercury News on this topic, and at least here's their view, is that citizen review of patents is necessary and will solve all of our problems. At least, you know, backing up a second, Denise, you're right that we do see patent reform legislation coming up in pretty much every session of Congress. Why it's being talked about, I think, a little bit more this time around than in past years is that we actually appear to be getting closer, not necessarily close, but closer to passing some sort of comprehensive patent reform. For example, the Senate had its Patent Reform Act that it has passed 95-5. There is also a House version which makes some changes, but is slowly making its way through the various channels in the House. Whether if that gets passed, there will be able, if the Senate and the House will be able to reconcile the two bills and actually get it up to President Obama for a signature remains to be seen. And I'm not all that optimistic until I see further movement. But my general thought is this, at least for a lot of the stories that we're seeing, many of them are couched in a doom and gloom scenario where, everything, all is for naught if this Patent Reform Act passes, and if the Patent Reform Act passes in its current form, it's not solving any problems, and if we only did, this or that, if we only did, if we only threw more money at the problem, or if we only, like the Mercury News article suggests, have citizen review and throw more information in front of the patent office, then that would solve all of our problems. Coming from my perspective, dealing with this on a daily basis, it's just not that simple. For example, the people talking about citizen review of patents and trying to get more information in front of the patent office. Well, if you do that, there's of course a possibility that in many cases the patent office will get flooded with information on particular patents, and somebody at the patent office actually has to go through and review that information, at least in theory. And so to solve that problem, you either have to get more examiners on each patent application, you throw more person power at it. In order to do that, you have to throw more money at the office. And also there's a timing aspect that's at issue here as well. It already takes, depending on what technology you're dealing with, anywhere between 15 months and 5-6+ years to even get a patent given the current system. So you throw more information at the office that people have to review. That, in theory, makes it even a longer process to get a patent. And there's a lot of moving pieces that have to be dealt with. Now, I haven't read the entire. I admit that I haven't read the entire Senate version of the Patent Reform Act, but there's definitely things in there that are good, things in there that might not be so good. And also, depending on what industry you're in, if you're in the pharma industry, you might like certain provisions much more than if you're in the electronics industry. You might not like those same provisions because of the various issues that you're dealing with depending on the technology. So all in all, I hate to just say it and kind of throw up my hands, but this is it's a very complicated issue. I don't think that one specific thing, regardless of what it is going to solve these perceived problems with the patent office. But I think what the best we can do is try to take a measured approach and try to just move things slowly in the right direction, try out different things, and see how they work in practice, and then see what the results are and if people are overall happy with the results. Wish I had a better answer.
No, we appreciate your insights. It's a complicated question.
Can I ask you guys something?
Sure.
In my industry, there's a lot of concern about patent trolls, and there's we haven't really even seen the worst of it yet. Is the legislation addressing some of those concerns? Is it going to make it more difficult for patent trolls to bring cases?
That I have not seen. The term patent troll is thrown around a lot. There are also people call them, non-practicing entities. The issue, there are definitely perceived issues with patent trolls or non-practicing entities filing many suits. And you've seen, I think it was just within the last month, there was a case or a number of cases filed against, I think, hundreds of different companies regarding one particular patent. I haven't looked into that case to see if it is truly a non-practicing entity or not. but that issue is, also it's very difficult and very complicated, because you have to, if you have a concern about non-practicing entities, or, to actually define that term, an entity that owns a patent but does not actually practice the invention that's claimed in the patent. You see that not only from entities that purchase a number of patents and then go out and enforce them, but also from small and large companies alike. I mean, I know on tech blogs, anytime a large technology company gets an interesting patent, there's usually a post about it and whether or not that patent's going to be implemented in any products. Well, some of those patents of course, will be implemented in products, and some of them will not. Even though those companies do make products that might involve other patents. So again, it's a very complicated issue to try to draw a line for the non-practicing entities when any patent is asserted that might not be actually practiced by the person, by the entity owning it, and trying to separate out those that we consider to be, quote unquote, good entities versus bad entities. So it's just another, it's another complicated problem that there's no easy solution, and there's no solution that I think is going to make everybody happy.
All right, well, just an update for you here. Netflix, not Netflix, sorry. Mind elsewhere, still in the Bahamas, apparently. LinkedIn trading at 95.56. And that's our segue to our resource of the week as well. Did you know that if you were not able to get in on the IPO here or have any privately held LinkedIn stock, you could have? And it's not too late. You've still got companies like Facebook out there, plenty of other sweet privately held companies. Maybe you're interested in Twitter that you might want to buy stock in. Did you know it's actually legal and possible for you to do that? There are outfits out there. One of them is called Second Market. Another one is called, let's see,
Shares Post.
Shares Post. That's exactly what I was thinking of.
I went to a Shares Post conference recently, and they had a former SEC commissioner speaking, and also lawyers from Wilson Sonsini. And it was pretty interesting. The lawyers from Wilson Sonsini were warning that there's going to be insider trading lawsuits in the secondary markets. Companies should be very careful to make sure they have insider trading policies in place and so on. It's becoming quite a vibrant market, but it's a private stock market where the public aren't allowed to take part. You have to be an accredited investor, which means you have to show you have a certain amount of wealth, and if you can show that, then the SEC that doesn't really mind where you trade. However, once we start running into problems, once people start losing money, there's not that much liquidity in these markets, so they could be manipulated by groups of individuals. We might start seeing some new laws and regulations in that area.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all, because these sites, they are doing their best to gatekeep on that accredited investor front. You have to have more than $200,000 per year annual income, or hold at least $1 million in assets before you can even get in the door. And then once you are in the door, Second Market representative Mark Murphy told Business Insider that the average transaction on the service is $2 million per trade. So, you have to be a pretty big fish out there to be able to play in this market. But, we've talked about it just on this show today. There are ways to game those kinds of systems. You could see people trying to slip in if they did not actually meet those requirements, just so that they could, engage in this kind of potentially profitable investing. So I'm with you, Tom, that I think that the SEC is going to watch this closely and make sure. There's a concern too for the individuals who are selling their stock. They're probably people who work for these companies. That's the only way you get that kind of stock in your hands, right? And whether there are sufficient protections for them as well too. So interesting legal thing to watch. But for the meantime, our resource of the week are things like Shares Post and Second Market. And there's an article called How to Buy Stock in Facebook over at our discussion points for today's show at delicious.com/internetcases/112. We also have a tip of the week for you that flows from my journeys in the Bahamas last week. I stumbled on this great article that someone named Venkat Rao wrote. He has a blog called Ribbon Farm. He's been around the web for a while. He's guest posted on Mashable and other places, and he's a good writer and thinker, and he wrote something called Bargaining with Your Right Brain. And it's a lengthy post, so I'll let you go over and check it out yourself. But the crux of it is that he really goes through the various gambits that people undergo when they're bargaining over things. And I think it's a really interesting tip for us here on This Week in Law, because 99.99% of the lawsuits that we talk about on this show end up in some sort of settlement forum, like the LimeWire case that they talked about so capably last week. And so this is really crucial. You know, everything that applies to bargaining for a straw purse or a child's toy in the Bahamas applies just as equally when you get into these high-powered law firm boardrooms and the terms are being hashed out. The typical thing of going in there with your low ball number and meeting somewhere in the middle, you know, that's one way to go. But he really lays out some different ways of thinking about bargaining and negotiating. And I thought it was a fascinating piece, and I throw it out for you all to enjoy, as I have very much enjoyed this show. Thank you so much, Tom Foremski, for joining us today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Tom is at Tom Foremski if you're looking him up in other circles such as Twitter. And of course, the Silicon Valley Watcher is his blog. So we really appreciate all your thoughts and insights, and I hope we can have you back sometime.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Also joining us, Justin Gray. Justin, really thrilled to have all your thoughts and insights about all those important patent and other points. Really appreciate your coming on.
Thank you for having me on again. It was a lot of fun. Always look forward to being on the show.
Thank you. And I believe Justin is Gray on Claims both at his blog and on Twitter. Is that right?
That is correct. Gray on Claims, Gray with an A.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Justin. And
Thank
Evan,
you.
Great as always chatting with you.
Yes, I enjoyed it very much as well. Great to talk with you. Justin, Tom, great to talk with you as well. Tom, nice to meet you. Justin, good to talk with you again.
Right. Evan, too, is Internet Cases wherever you are looking for him, both on Twitter and his blog and elsewhere in the world, too, no doubt. So go out and hit him up. And thank you so much again, Evan, for doing such a great job last week while I was gone, and for helping out so capably in aggregating our discussion points for today, too, over on your Delicious account for a change.
Yes, my pleasure. It was a great time. Had a great time last week, and I think I said this before we actually started rolling, so I'll say it again. You know, I have a new appreciation for the work that you do hosting the show every week. It requires a lot of RAM up in your head, so you certainly make it look easy and do a wonderful job, and so it's I definitely have a new appreciation for it. Thank you.
Yes, doing the show definitely keeps all my chips humming. I like to remember on those chips up there to tell people that after the show, if they want to get in touch, you can email me. I'm Denise at twit.tv. We are, of course, available on places like iTunes and YouTube, and also on the Twit site itself, which is twit.tv/TWiL. And as brilliant people have figured out, we don't have comments on the Twit website itself, but I blog at bagandbaggage.com, and people are very wise in hitting me up with comments there too. So I get those comments when you post them to Bag and Baggage, but we all get them, and the rest of the public who watch the show can see them too over on the show's Facebook page, which is facebook.com/thisweekinlaw. It is open for comments there 24/7, and we also try to post up some of our pre-show links that we'd love to get your thoughts and comments on each week. So do hit us up there between the shows. Next week for episode 113, we will record at Friday, 11 Pacific time and 1800 UTC. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you then. Thanks so much. Take care.